大家好，欢迎来到智库传声。最近香格里拉对话会上，中国退役大校周波在外媒采访中抛出一个重磅方案：伊朗的浓缩铀或许可以交由中国托管。这句话分量非常重，因为伊朗核问题是中东最危险的导火索，而中国一旦出面，就意味着全球安全牌桌上已经不再是美国一家说了算。过去，美国靠制裁、威胁和战争恐吓压中东，但现在问题来了，伊朗不信美国，美国也压不住伊朗，那谁能给这场危机一个台阶？今天我们就来拆解周波大校这段硬核采访，看看中国为什么敢接这个烫手山芋，又会如何让美国感到真正不安。
Of course, any defense summit is always going to have a keen interest on China's interaction with the region, particularly off the back of the recent visit from US President Donald Trump. So I'm very pleased to welcome to Counterpoints Zhao Bao, the retired senior colonel from the Chinese Liberation Army and current senior fellow at the Center for International Security and Strategy at the Tsinghua University. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
You listened to US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth make his comments here at the Shangri-La Dialogue. First of all, give me an overview of your sense of his comments to the dialogue.
It's very interesting for me to hear what he said because I've been attending Shangri-La Dialogue for 13 consecutive years except for the COVID period. So I know exactly how his predecessors talked about the China-US relationship. And I also remember clearly what he said about this relationship last year. It's interesting for me to say that compare with his last year's remarks, his tone seems to be much more moderated this year. And
last year, his comments, he was saying that China poses a real threat and that threat could be imminent. So do you think he's toned down his rhetoric a little bit?
Yes, of course, because he was talking more than what you said last year. He talked about how a conflict is imminent and it could be inevitable, although he said he wasn't that sure about that. But his comment actually was, contradictory to what his predecessor said. Yeah, here at Shangri-La Dialogue, with the remarks made by Lord Austin. Lord Austin's argument was that it was not imminent, not inevitable. Okay, let's forget all these comments. And I believe his tone is much more moderated just because his boss, he referred Donald Trump as his boss, just visited China, in which he and his Chinese counterpart have made a lot of, agreements and consensus on a number of important things. So I think what is most important for us is this concept of constructive strategic stability. Yeah, this is most important because stability can only be found between two powers of equal strength. So in this regard, this is the first time that the United States has officially recognized China as a peer power. Before that, all the description starting from Donald Trump's first term about China are all negative in a way because China is either a strategic competitor or even posing threat, so on and so forth. But this time, you can see, even from Trump's body language in Beijing, that he does have a great, appreciation for what he has seen. Yeah, yeah.
So do you read it then from President Trump's meeting in Beijing, from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's comments, that now the US has been forced to see China as an equal, not as a lesser rival?
I think so. I like this word you mean. United States is forced to change its policy. Why? Because in the last 9 years since the first Trump administration, we have seen a number of upheavals in a bilateral relationship, which reached a historical high when Donald Trump tried to, levy 145% tariff on China. This is insane, right? So that is why I'm happy to see actually the establishment of two new, institutions. That is that is a board for investment and a board for trade, because with these two new institutions, I believe such crazy things like 145% tariff would have to be regulated by these organizations.
Secretary of Defence Hegseth did say, though, a few pointed warnings, I suppose, saying that we can never have a Pacific region dominated by any hegemony. That did seem to be a pointed warning. Do you think China will take it as such?
Well, I think he was hinting China, right? Although Trump's visit to China is successful, but this is intrinsically a competitive relationship. And being here to talk to so many countries, including Americans, allies, and partners, I think it is needful for the United States to play up with this kind of, hostile atmosphere, to justify all what he was about to say. But even that was mentioned, it was not to a great extent. What you read from this conversation is that actually we would not be free ridden by any other countries, and you guys have to share the burden whatsoever. Actually, in so saying, the United States doesn't look like a big brother of the alliance. If you are the big brother of alliance, basically you got to take up the lion's share of responsibilities. If you ask the junior brothers, to share the burden, then what is the point of such an alliance? So I don't know how these countries would respond, but I believe they will have to think. But in this way...
So if you think that the US can no longer say that they're the big brother of the alliance, are you suggesting then that the US has lost its leadership role in the alliance?
I think in a way the United States is really tired of such a leadership role, especially in Europe, So that is why Trump is withdrawing troops from Germany, because I think he was almost heartbroken to see none of these allies would turn up, for example, in the Strait of Hormuz, to join Americans' military operations. So what is the use of such allies, right? So he has natural reasons to doubt about it.
Do you think that that is a result of his strategic decision, or has the US relinquished or lost some of its strength on the world stage, and so this is the president's natural response to that?
I think the answer lies in your second question, because right now America's whole strength would not be strong enough to police the whole world. So it has to stay focused. It has to withdraw. And then it has to focus on the Western Hemisphere, which is America's home. And then it has to withdraw to the Indo-Pacific region, which is the most dynamic region in the world. So it has to stay focused. And therefore, it needs, a burden sharing among allies. And to some extent, it would not care so much about Europe anymore.
There has been discussion about what was talked of regarding Iran between President Trump and leader Xi in those Beijing meetings. Do you think that China has sway over Iran? Could China force Iran to accept a deal if it wanted to?
Well, you see, the question is how the deal would look like, right? I think what China can do is the best possible role for China is actually for Iran to give the uranium to Chinese custody, because there are already reports about this, but the Chinese government did not say yes or no. But why? Because China should have no problem of being an honest broker, and China certainly have taken knowledge to even downgrade the uranium, even it is needed. So in the past, Iran has provided uranium to Russia, but this time Russia itself is in a war. And you see, Iran's foreign minister actually came to China a week before Trump's visit, right? So there should be a lot of behind the door details telling something like that. So I believe this is probably what China can do at the best. Because otherwise, for China, as Trump wish to give pressure on Iran. Iran can easily say, well, it's the United States that has launched a war, right? So what do you expect us to do? But I think the first thing that can be done about the war is a kind of a joint announcement by United States and Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz at the same time, because that would meet everybody's interest. But as to how we could just get there, I believe the United States and Iran would have to, have a lot of discussions on it. But it seems that Iran is having an upper hand, because even the United States has agreed to defreeze the asset. That shows, Iran has some very powerful cards.
If I can just turn back to the beginning of your comments there with regards to the uranium, do you think the US would accept a plan that would see Iran handing its uranium to China?
No, they won't. And I wish they would, but they would probably be very reluctant, because so far they insist to seize Iran's uranium. I understand why, because anyway, this is the very purpose, for them to launch this war, or even the excuse. So if they launch this war and the uranium they have been trying to find end up in Chinese hand, that sounds like a slap on the face, right? But think of this. There's no way that China would, misuse this kind of uranium, and probably this is the best way, to save face for both sides. Because how can Iran give uranium to the United States? This is just like a total surrender. So it's just impossible. No matter what Trump said, it's just impossible. And we could have a discussion with the IAEA, to solve this problem that is good for everyone.
If we turn to China's relationship with Gulf countries, how would you assess China's strategic relationship with that part of the world?
Well, I think it is always good, because in the Middle East, China is the only country which can actually befriend every other country without any country in the region having any doubt that China could become an ally to its own enemies. So China's role in the Middle East is really positive. The only question is, there are too many requests coming to China, asking China to play a bigger role. And these kind of requests are contradictory themselves. It's just like the war in Ukraine. For us, this is a war between two friends, and both of them want you to help. And how can you help? That is a difficult and most challenging thing. So I believe, I appreciate you asked this question, because now time has come for China to think how we can actually play a bigger role than before, that can actually show China is willing to show the greater international responsibility. Because everybody see the United States, like it or not, it doesn't behave as everybody wishes. So then they look up to China to play.
And how do you see China playing more of an international role, perhaps particularly in the Middle East?
Well, I think Chinese role could be three. One is a facilitator, the second is a mediator, the third one is a security guarantor. But sometimes you may have to combine all this role all together. As I said, this is almost unprecedented. Although China did mediate between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which is a resounding success for China. I think this success can encourage China, to do more similar things in the future. But I doubt about the so-called theory of filling the vacuum, because these vacuums could be traps, right? Do not try to fill in the vacuum, because in a region, it's just like a forest that is burned. So there are two ways of restoring the forest. One is let it grow back, which takes time. Another is you plant an artificial forest, which could be quickly done, but then you change the environment forever, right? So I think the best way probably is the first one, with some humanitarian assistance from outsiders. You just can't let it grow. We don't know how long it will take. But then, in other words, China should play the role of a good Samaritan. Yeah, so that is the only role that is appropriate. Do not do any interventions on the so-called in the name of humanitarian intervention, because we have too many examples of all these humanitarian interventions. Most of them are proven to be failures. Yeah, because every region has its own conditions. So, for example, when it comes to Afghan issue, people say it has to be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned. So, because this is an Afghan issue, yeah. So, see what the United States has done to Afghanistan, and I believe few people now in the United States would say they have done the right thing, right?
And just finally, before we wrap up, you've brought us back to the United States, so I should ask, how do you interpret, how do you think the Chinese leadership is interpreting President Trump's comments, or perhaps lack of comments, with regards to US support for Taiwan?
Oh, I think that is a turning point already, because apparently he was reluctant to respond to Chinese remarks on Taiwan issue in Beijing. I believe in Beijing, the remarks from Chinese would be very powerful. So he tried to avoid making direct response, but he said something on Air Force One on his way back home, right? And there are two things that are important. One is he would be the one to make a decision, but but it will take him some time. So that means this decision is not made, right? The second thing is the Taiwan would be 9,500 miles away from United States. So fighting a war doesn't seem to be so worthwhile. So even this is not clear-cut, opposition to future American intervention, but this is almost like opening a window, which has caused a lot of anxiety among Taiwanese authority. So my general assessment is, with China becoming ever stronger, and almost as a equal power. So the United States would find it more and more difficult to sell arms to Taiwanese authority in the future. They may continue, but they would find it very hard, because China simply has more tools in the toolkit, be it sanctions against American companies, or be it a change of decision to buy, such as a Boeing aircraft, or more exercises around the island. So eventually the United States would have to think about this question. Yes, these arms sales are really lucrative, but is it really worthwhile if they invite a bigger danger, which might cost American lives?
We'll have to leave it there.
看完周波大校这段表态，我最大的感受是，这绝不是一句简单的外交建议，而是中国给中东危机开出的一张新药方，把伊朗的浓缩铀交给中国托管。表面上看是为美伊对抗找一个技术性出口，但往深了看，它其实是在告诉世界，解决国际危机不一定非要靠航母、制裁和轰炸，也可以靠信用、技术和公信力。美国过去在中东的逻辑很简单，先制造压力，再制造恐惧，最后以世界警察的身份进场收割。可是现在这套旧剧本越来越演不下去了。伊朗不可能向美国低头，把自己的核心筹码交出去。美国也很难再像过去那样靠一句威胁就让整个中东乖乖听话。这就是为什么中国托管这个方案如此扎眼，因为它击中的不是某一个具体问题，而是美国霸权的核心软肋。美国有力量制造危机，却越来越没有能力结束危机。美国能把桌子掀翻，却给不了各方一个体面的台阶。而中国的角色正在发生变化。过去世界提到中国，想到的是贸易、制造、基建、能源合作，但现在中国正在越来越多地进入全球安全议题的核心位置。 不是去拉帮结派，不是去搞军事占领，而是用一种更稳、更实用的方式提供解决方案，这才是真正的大国底气。美国防长在相会现场还在要求盟友多交保护费，还在强化阵营对抗，而中国给出的思路是让危机降温，让核材料可控，让中东避免继续滑向战争。一个还在靠霸权收账，一个已经开始提供全球公共安全产品。这就是差距。所以我认为这件事真正值得关注的，不只是伊朗的铀会不会交给中国，而是一个更大的趋势：中东的美国单极时代正在加速松动，而中国正在以一种更低调但更有分量的方式进入全球安全秩序的中心。霸权靠武力制造废墟，王道用信誉重建森林。